For 5 long years, Julian Rossi never truly slept. Chicago's most ruthless mafia boss lived in a nightmare of endless waking hours. The most expensive doctors in America could do absolutely nothing. Yet, at exactly 3 in the morning, the impossible happened. Julian was completely unconscious. He was sleeping soundly on a cold stainless steel prep table. Right beside his head sat a completely empty soup bowl, who had just done what all of American medicine could not. Winter winds battered the reinforced glass. Chicago faced its worst blizzard in decades. Streetlights flickered weakly in the freezing storm. But up on the 100th floor, there was no cold. There was only deafening silence. Julian Rossi stood perfectly still by the massive window. At 35, he controlled the entire criminal underworld. He owned casinos, luxury hotels, and corrupt politicians. His $50 million penthouse was a fortress. Yet, it felt like a massive tomb. He stared blankly at his own reflection. His custom-tailored suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly, but his face told an entirely different story. Deep dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. Thick, red veins webbed across his vision. He looked like a walking ghost. The ruthless viper was slowly dying inside. 5 long years had passed since the bloody coup. 5 years since he took the throne by force. He secured his empire with terrifying precision, but the heavy crown came with a terrible curse. The moment the gunfire stopped, his sleep completely vanished. At first, it was just a few restless nights. Then, it became an unbreakable cycle of pure torture. He would lie in his massive silk bed. He would stare at the dark ceiling for hours. His mind refused to shut down. Every threat amplified in the dead of night. His brain was constantly calculating, planning, and anticipating attacks. Even the softest whisper of the wind sounded like approaching footsteps. He could never let his guard down. Not even for a single second. The power he fought so hard for had trapped him. Could wealth truly buy peace? In America, immense wealth could buy almost anything. Julian flew in elite neurologists from Manhattan. He funded private sleep clinics. They handed him bottles of experimental chemical compounds. They prescribed heavy industrial sedatives. Some nights, he swallowed pills that could tranquilize a horse. Nothing worked. The expensive medications only made his body completely numb. His mind remained horrifyingly awake. He would lie there paralyzed but fully conscious. It was a terrifying state of living paralysis. He eventually threw the useless bottles into the trash. The top medical minds in the country had failed him. They quietly took their massive checks and fled. They were terrified of the anger of the viper. Medicine had no cure for a soul soaked in paranoia. Exhaustion was driving him close to insanity. Hallucinations flickered in the corners of his vision. Shadows twisted into the shapes of his dead enemies. The ticking of his diamond watch sounded like hammer strikes. The distant wail of police sirens felt like physical pain. His hands occasionally trembled during syndicate meetings. He hid it well beneath the mahogany boardroom table. But his ruthless rivals were actively watching. They were waiting like hungry wolves in the dark. They wanted him to show just one sign of weakness. He had to maintain the strong facade, but his internal reality was crumbling fast. He was a billionaire, drowning in a sea of pure exhaustion. He could not endure another minute. The silence was suffocating him. He threw on a dark jacket over his wrinkled shirt. He walked out of the penthouse and entered the private elevator. He needed to move to keep his mind from snapping. The elevator descended through the luxury hotel. Floors of sleeping guests passed by. He envied every single one of them. He envied their simple, peaceful, and ignorant lives. He wandered aimlessly through the empty employee corridors. The sterile fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. He was looking for any distraction from his own mind. But the real secret to his salvation wasn't in a pill bottle. It was waiting for him in the most unexpected place. The elevator chimed softly at the 50th floor. This was the industrial catering level. It housed massive kitchens for elite restaurants. At 3 in the morning, it should have been completely deserted. The steel doors were usually locked tight until the morning prep. But tonight, A faint yellow light spilled into the dark hallway. Julian frowned deeply. What was going on here? His survival instincts instantly flared to life. He quietly reached for the cold weapon hidden in his jacket. He approached the heavy metal door without making a sound. Instead of an intruder, a strange scent suddenly drifted through the cold air. It wasn't the smell of expensive truffles or imported caviar. It was the rich, hearty aroma of slow-cooked beef and roasted potatoes. It smelled exactly like a warm home, something he had never known in his violent life. Julian slowly pushed the heavy metal door open. Morning sunlight pierced through the high frosted windows. It was exactly 8 o'clock. Julian slowly opened his heavy eyes. He blinked in absolute confusion. He was lying on a cold stainless steel prep table. His neck was incredibly stiff. His broad back ached terribly from the hard metal. Yet, his mind was completely quiet. The endless, roaring storm of paranoia was gone. He had actually slept for 5 solid hours. He sat up slowly. He stared at the empty ceramic bowl resting beside him. The lingering smell of roasted garlic still hung in the air. He needed to find the creator of this absolute miracle. Within 10 minutes, he summoned the entire culinary staff of the luxury hotel. Dozens of chefs quickly lined up in the grand dining room. They were absolutely terrified. The ruthless viper almost never visited them during daylight. Standing at the very front was head chef Laurent. He was a deeply arrogant man boasting 2 Michelin stars. He wore a perfectly crisp white coat. He noticed Julian gently holding the empty rustic bowl. Laurent's greedy mind raced. He instantly saw a massive financial opportunity. A golden chance to deeply impress the billionaire owner. He boldly stepped forward from the line. "I prepared that special midnight meal for you, Mr. Rossi." Laurent lied smoothly. He smiled with utter confidence. He thought he had just secured his wealthy future. But here is where things took a dangerous turn. Julian studied the arrogant man coldly. His dark, bloodshot eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't say a word for a long moment. "Make it again," Julian finally ordered softly. "Exactly the same way." Laurent nodded eagerly. He quickly rushed back into his state-of-the-art kitchen. He immediately pulled out the most expensive ingredients in all of Chicago. He expertly sliced premium Japanese, a 5 Wagyu beef. He carefully shaved rare black truffles imported directly from France. He simmered a rich bone broth infused with aged 100-year-old cognac. He even garnished the dark dish with delicate, edible gold flakes. A single serving of this masterpiece easily cost $800. He proudly carried the steaming, elegant porcelain dish back to the main dining room. He placed it carefully before his highly dangerous boss. The entire dining room held its collective breath. Complete silence filled the massive space. Julian picked up a heavy silver spoon. He slowly dipped it into the dark, fragrant broth. He brought the hot liquid to his lips. Laurent proudly puffed out his chest. He fully expected a massive financial bonus, perhaps a permanent promotion to executive director of hospitality. Julian tasted the expensive luxury liquid. He swallowed it very slowly. His cold expression remained completely unreadable. Then, he slowly lowered the shiny silver spoon. He looked directly into Laurent's incredibly confident eyes. "Is this really the best you can do?" Suddenly, Julian's large hand shot out. He violently swiped the expensive porcelain bowl right off the table. It struck the polished marble wall with a deafening crash. Boiling hot broth and shiny gold flakes splattered everywhere. The terrified chefs instantly jumped back in pure horror. Laurent turned completely pale. His arrogant knees began to shake violently. "Do you really think I am a total idiot?" Julian's voice was a deadly, quiet whisper. "That is not the same soup." The meal from last night was incredibly simple. It tasted like rustic bruised potatoes and cheap, tough meat. But it carried a strange, undeniable warmth. It felt exactly like a protective, loving embrace. Laurent's luxurious creation was entirely soulless. It was just expensive, meaningless garbage. Julian stepped dangerously close to the heavily trembling chef. "You have exactly 10 seconds to tell me the absolute truth. Who really used my kitchen at 3 in the morning?" The top floor of the Chicago high-rise was a playground for the incredibly rich. Elite guests drank $2,000 champagne. They dined under massive crystal chandeliers. They laughed softly while enjoying perfectly plated luxury meals. The dining room was an absolute masterpiece of modern design. It was a world of flawless beauty and endless money. But the real engine of this empire was strictly hidden away. It was a brutal world of extreme heat and sharp knives. Deep inside the stainless steel industrial kitchen, daily survival was everything. The dinner service rush was an absolute, unforgiving war zone. Line cooks shouted orders aggressively over the roaring gas stoves. Amidst this chaotic madness stood 26-year-old Maya Carter. She always wore a heavily stained apron, covered in white flour. Her curvy, full figure made her stand out in the worst possible way. The narrow kitchen aisles were built for fast, skinny, frantic culinary students. Maya simply did not fit their highly desired visual mold. She was just a lowly prep cook, trapped at the absolute bottom. The relentless pace of the demanding kitchen made people incredibly cruel. The other ambitious chefs constantly treated her like a moving obstacle. They bumped roughly into her shoulders without ever saying sorry. "Move faster! You are blocking the whole line!" They laughed at her expense while she struggled with 50-pound potato sacks. They openly mocked her curvy body during their quick smoke breaks. They called her a slow, useless, overfed disaster who ruined their rhythm. Maya heard every single cruel whisper clearly over the frying pans. Did she ever scream back at them? She never fought back. She simply lowered her head. She kept washing vegetables. The arrogant chefs assumed she was just naturally lazy and unmotivated. They thought she ate too much of the premium pantry inventory. But here is where the truth gets incredibly heartbreaking. The real reason for her slow movements was pure, crushing physical exhaustion. Maya was practically killing herself just to survive the harsh American reality. She worked 3 brutal consecutive shifts every single day. She served coffee at dawn and chopped onions until midnight. She was completely buried under a massive mountain of terrifying medical debt. Her younger brother needed incredibly expensive, life-saving dialysis treatments every week. The ruthless hospital bills in Chicago were completely destroying her young life. She needed every single minimum wage dollar just to keep him breathing. She never touched the fancy ingredients she carefully prepped for hours. While the other privileged cooks sneaked bites of expensive steak, Maya starved. She survived entirely on discarded potato peels and hard leftover bread crusts. She saved her meager weekly paycheck strictly for the relentless debt collectors. Her body was heavy, but her stomach was constantly empty and aching. The severe physical toll of the hot kitchen was breaking her down. Yet, her incredibly warm spirit somehow remained completely intact. Kindness was her only remaining defense against a deeply unfair, elitist world. She never let the daily cruelty turn her soft heart completely cold. At 2 a.m, the violent dinner rush finally ended. The arrogant head chefs packed their expensive leather knife rolls and left. The wealthy patrons descended back into the freezing, snowy Chicago night. The massive industrial kitchen finally fell completely, peacefully silent. This was the only time Maya could actually catch her breath. She was left entirely alone to scrub the horribly greasy stovetops. She mopped the slippery tiled floors until her swollen joints screamed in pain. Did anyone ever thank her for this unpaid extra labor? Absolutely no one. She never complained to management. She wiped the heavy sweat from her tired brow. She just smiled softly. In the quiet solitude of the graveyard shift, Maya found her only peace. She gathered the unsellable meat scraps that the head chef had discarded. She collected the bruised carrots and slightly wilted celery from the trash bins. These were the worthless peasant ingredients that the luxury restaurant threw away daily. But to Maya, they were an absolute treasure. She carefully chopped the rejected vegetables with deep, genuine love. She slowly simmered the cheap bones into a rich, deeply comforting broth. This was the humble food of struggling, hard-working families. It was a rustic recipe passed down from her late grandmother. She wasn't cooking to impress arrogant billionaires or win prestigious culinary awards. She was cooking to survive another freezing night. Julian left the trembling chef behind. He demanded raw facts, immediately. He took the private elevator straight down to the basement security hub. Dozens of glowing monitors lit the dark room. "Pull up the 50th floor," Julian ordered the nervous guard. Time code 2 in the morning. He needed to see the absolute truth. The screen flickered to life. He watched the arrogant culinary staff finally leave. The massive kitchen became entirely empty. Then, a single figure slowly stepped back into the frame. It was the young prep cook. Her name badge read Maya Carter. She looked incredibly exhausted. Julian leaned closer to the bright screen. He closely analyzed her every move. Would she crack open the expensive wine vault? Would she steal premium cuts of meat? But here is where the footage completely shattered his expectations. She completely ignored the locked luxury refrigerators. Instead, she walked directly toward the daily discard bins. She carefully pulled out tough beef trimmings. She saved a handful of cheap, dry barley. She washed a few bruised carrots. This was literally the culinary garbage of Chicago's elite. What was she doing? She placed the worthless scraps into a large metal pot. She stirred the boiling water with deep concentration. She wasn't cooking a secret gourmet masterpiece. She was cooking a desperate survival meal. It was the exact opposite of everything Laurent represented. It was honest. The time code on the screen slowly ticked forward. It hit 2:45. The rich broth was finally ready. Maya carefully poured the hot liquid into 2 cheap ceramic bowls. Julian watched with intense focus. Was she going to eat both massive portions herself? Suddenly, the heavy back door of the kitchen creaked open. A blast of white snow blew inside. An old man stumbled into the warm room. It was Arthur. He was the 60-year-old night watchman for the loading dock. His worn uniform was completely covered in thick ice. He was violently shivering from the brutal winter blizzard. Maya did not hesitate for a single second. She immediately pushed the largest bowl of steaming soup toward the freezing old man. She gently handed him a piece of hard, toasted bread. Arthur looked up at her with incredibly grateful eyes. He spoke a few silent words. Maya just smiled warmly and shook her head. She hid her own crushing exhaustion perfectly. She gave away her only hot meal of the entire day. She simply wanted to warm a freezing stranger. She took the smaller portion for herself. She ate the meager scraps while standing up. She didn't even take a proper break. Julian sat completely frozen in the dark security room. The bright monitor reflected in his tired eyes. He finally understood the profound mystery of the midnight stew. The medicine that had cured his severe, agonizing insomnia wasn't a rare ingredient. It wasn't a magic chemical compound. It was the pure, unselfish warmth of human kindness. A low-wage worker had cooked a humble meal to save a freezing old man. And that simple, loving act had accidentally saved a billionaire mafia boss. He had searched the entire world for a cure. He never realized it was quietly boiling in his own kitchen. His immense fortune meant absolutely nothing here. A simple bowl of peasant food had done the impossible. It gave him peace. Laurent stormed back into the main kitchen area. His immaculate white chef uniform was heavily stained. His massive, fragile ego was completely shattered. Julian Rossi had given him exactly 10 seconds to confess. He had narrowly escaped the dining room with his life. He was absolutely furious and dripping with cold sweat. His incredibly expensive culinary degree meant nothing upstairs. He needed someone to violently punish right now. He needed a weak, entirely defenseless target. His cruel eyes scanned the busy industrial room. They immediately locked onto Maya Carter. She was quietly chopping celery in the far corner. She was the perfect victim. He marched violently down the narrow stainless steel aisle. The other ambitious line cooks quickly stepped aside. They knew a brutal, unforgiving storm was rapidly approaching. "You stupid, useless, pathetic thief!" Laurent screamed loudly. The entire bustling kitchen suddenly fell completely dead silent. He pointed a violently shaking finger directly at Maya. "You stole the premium Japanese Wagyu beef. You ruined my incredibly expensive imported French truffles." It was an absolutely ridiculous, desperate lie. Maya had never even touched the locked luxury refrigerators. She barely earned $15 pathetic an hour. She could not afford a decent lunch. She just stared at him in pure shock. She didn't say a word. Maya had just finished organizing an entire massive prep tray. It held exactly 200 perfectly diced heirloom tomatoes. It had taken her 3 agonizing, exhausting hours to finish. Laurent violently slammed his hands under the heavy silver tray and flipped it. The thick metal crashed loudly against the hard tiled floor. Red tomatoes scattered across the greasy floor like fresh blood. "Look at this absolutely disgusting, incredibly pathetic mess," Laurent yelled furiously. The young, ambitious culinary students just watched with cold, uncaring eyes. They eagerly enjoyed this horrible, humiliating public execution. They whispered cruel, nasty insults to each other. They wanted the slow, curvy girl completely gone. Maya looked down at her ruined hard work. She did not cry. She simply closed her eyes. Laurent was certainly not finished destroying her fragile dignity. He viciously attacked her physical appearance with pure venom. "You are a massive, incredibly slow barricade in my kitchen." He mocked loudly for everyone to hear. "You probably eat half of our incredibly expensive inventory every single night. Look at your absolutely pathetic, disgustingly oversized body. You do not belong in a high-class luxury kitchen." The incredibly cruel words echoed harshly off the cold steel walls. The other privileged cooks immediately burst into loud, mocking laughter. The toxic Chicago workplace fed greedily on this nasty cruelty. They eagerly joined the wealthy executive chef's sick game. Maya heard every single toxic, heartbreaking insult. She took a deep breath. She swallowed her heavy pride. She slowly knelt down onto the horribly greasy tile floor. She completely ignored the wealthy, laughing culinary graduates surrounding her. She completely ignored the burning humiliation rising in her chest. She carefully started picking up the ruined red tomatoes. She used her bare, heavily scarred hands to clean the mess. The acidic vegetable juice painfully stung her deep kitchen burns. She did not defend herself. She did not scream for human justice. She thought only of her sick brother. She desperately needed this terrible, low-paying job. She accepted the unfair burden silently. She just kept cleaning. But what happened next would change the entire power dynamic. High above the chaotic kitchen was a dark mezzanine balcony. Julian Rossi stood perfectly silently in the heavy, cold shadows. The ruthless Chicago Mafia boss saw the entire disgusting, heartbreaking scene. He watched the highly educated, wealthy chefs acting like absolute brutal monsters. He watched the poorest, most exhausted girl in the room acting like a saint. The stark emotional contrast was absolutely, fundamentally sickening to witness. These elite culinary stars were just rotten, arrogant cowards. Maya Carter was the only decent human being in the building. She possessed incredible, undeniable, quiet strength. Julian's large hands gripped the cold metal balcony railing tightly. His scarred knuckles turned completely white from the immense pressure. A dark, dangerous fury ignited deep in his chest. The terrifying viper had finally found his next target. He was going to destroy them. The massive clock struck exactly 3. The fierce Chicago blizzard howled viciously outside. Inside the kitchen, everything smelled of harsh chemical bleach. Maya knelt on the cold floor alone. Her deeply scarred hands scrubbed the greasy tiles. She fully expected to be fired tomorrow morning. Laurent would definitely make sure of it. She had absolutely nothing left to lose. Her stomach growled, with a painful, hollow ache. She gathered the last remaining beef scraps. She found a few wrinkled potatoes. She decided to cook one final meal. The heavy cast-iron pot bubbled softly. The warm scent of roasted garlic filled the air. It beautifully masked the sharp smell of cleaning supplies. She poured the hot liquid into a cracked ceramic bowl. She held the warm bowl close to her chest. It was her only remaining comfort. Suddenly, the heavy kitchen door opened. Heavy footsteps echoed on the wet floor. Maya turned around slowly. A tall shadow stepped into the dim light. It was Julian, but he looked completely different tonight. He wore no expensive designer suit. He wore a simple, dark gray sweater. His broad shoulders slumped heavily. His dark eyes were completely hollow. He looked like a man drowning in pure darkness. The terrifying aura of the Mafia boss was gone. He just looked incredibly lost. He looked utterly, completely exhausted. He stopped near the stainless steel prep table. He stared blankly at the boiling pot. He did not say a single word. The silence between them was suffocating. Who was this lonely ghost? Maya did not recognize the billionaire owner. She had never seen the Viper before. She only saw another overworked, starving human being. He looked just like the struggling warehouse workers. He looked like someone broken by the cruel city. Most people would have run away in pure terror. His dark, bruised eyes carried a dangerous, lethal weight. But here is where the story gets truly incredible. Maya did not shrink away. She did not lower her head in fear. She simply looked at his pale, tired face. She saw his deeply trembling hands. Her soft heart immediately took over. She walked quietly toward the cold metal table. She carried her only hot meal of the day. She gently placed the steaming bowl down. She pushed it slowly toward him. Would he reject her humble offering? The heavy ceramic bowl slid across the steel. It made a soft, scraping sound. Hot steam curled up between their faces. The rich aroma of beef broth wrapped around them. Julian looked down at the hot, rustic meal. He then looked up at her face. Maya gave him a warm, gentle smile. It was a completely innocent, uncalculated gesture. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for a promotion. She just offered a quiet slice of pure humanity. "Eat," she whispered softly. "It helps the cold." She turned her back to the most dangerous man. She went back to scrubbing the dirty floor. Julian stood completely paralyzed. The hot ceramic warmed his freezing fingertips. A profound, unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. He was a ruthless monster to the entire world. Yet, this curvy, exhausted girl just fed him. She asked for absolutely nothing in return. It was a perfectly beautiful, deeply shattering moment. Julian raised the cheap spoon to his mouth. He tasted the rich broth. Suddenly, the heavy kitchen doors violently crashed open. The sharp noise shattered the quiet, midnight peace. Head chef Laurent stormed inside. The luxury hotel's general manager, Mr. Sterling, closely followed him. They had been frantically searching the massive building for the mysterious midnight cook. They stopped completely dead in their tracks. They saw the terrifying Mafia Boss sitting at a humble prep table. They saw the curvy prep cook standing awkwardly nearby. Laurent's greedy eyes immediately lit up with cruel, vicious excitement. He arrogantly believed this was his golden moment. He thought Maya was bothering the billionaire owner. "You absolutely disgusting creature!" Laurent screamed at the top of his lungs. "How dare you use our premium kitchen?" He marched aggressively toward the trembling girl. Mr. Sterling quickly chimed in. "We will call the Chicago police immediately, Mr. Rossi. She will pay for this." They verbally tore her apart without mercy. They viciously insulted her heavy body and her stained clothes. Maya shrank back against the cold steel counter in pure terror. Her scarred hands shook violently. She thought about her sick brother's unpaid medical bills. She fully expected to be dragged to a freezing jail cell. But what happened next would shock everyone in the room. The arrogant men waited eagerly for Julian to violently explode. They fully expected the ruthless Viper to destroy her life. Instead, the industrial kitchen fell into a terrifying, suffocating silence. Julian did not yell. He did not pull a weapon. He did not flip the heavy metal table. He simply kept eating. He slowly brought another spoonful of the rustic broth to his lips. He swallowed it with deep, visible appreciation. The metal spoon clinked softly against the cracked ceramic bowl. It was the only sound echoing in the massive room. Laurent nervously swallowed hard. The general manager started sweating profusely. The heavy, prolonged silence was completely agonizing. Why wasn't the dangerous boss speaking? What was he planning? Julian finally scraped the very bottom of the humble bowl. He carefully placed the silver spoon down. He wiped his mouth with a crisp, white napkin. He slowly stood up to his full, deeply intimidating height. He completely ignored the two sweating men standing just feet away. He walked directly toward the terrified, trembling prep cook. Maya tightly closed her eyes. She braced herself for a harsh physical blow. She braced for a cruel insult to shatter her soul. The brutal strike never came. Julian smoothly took off his heavy winter coat. It was a custom $10,000 Italian cashmere overcoat. He gently draped the incredibly expensive fabric over Maya's shivering, exhausted shoulders. The luxurious dark material instantly enveloped her in absolute warmth. It smelled of rich cologne and quiet, undeniable power. He carefully pulled the soft lapels together to shield her from the cold air. He treated the flower-covered, plus-size girl like absolute royalty. Maya opened her eyes in pure, utter disbelief. Laurent loudly gasped in sheer horror. His arrogant jaw completely dropped. Mr. Sterling actually took a frightened step backward. It made absolutely no logical sense to their cruel minds. Julian finally turned his dark eyes toward the two men. The protective warmth vanished instantly. His face became a mask of pure, lethal ice. He did not need to raise his deep voice. True power never actually needs to shout. He stared directly into their pathetic, terrified souls. All of you. The quiet words cut through the room like sharp razors. Out of my building in 3 minutes. Laurent tried to stutter a desperate, pathetic apology. Julian simply raised a single, commanding finger. The chef instantly choked on his own words. The message was absolutely crystal clear. They would never work in this wealthy city ever again. The ruthless king of Chicago had spoken. The reign of the cruel bullies was permanently over. Months later, the 100th floor penthouse felt completely different. The terrifying, sleepless nights in Chicago were finally gone. Julian Rossi no longer relied on elite Manhattan doctors. He permanently threw away the useless chemical sedatives. The $5 million modern kitchen upstairs sat entirely empty. Instead, he spent his quiet nights in a small, warm suburban home. He traded his massive glass fortress for absolute peace. The brutal Midwestern blizzards no longer felt freezing cold. Maya Carter never worked another brutal graveyard shift again. Her younger brother finally received his expensive, life-saving medical transplant. She now cooked happily in her own bright, beautiful kitchen. But the real secret to his ongoing survival was incredibly simple. Every evening, at exactly 6 o'clock, the powerful Mafia Boss came home. He took off his expensive dark suit. He sat quietly at a simple wooden dining table. He waited patiently for a deeply familiar scent. It was the rich, rustic smell of slow-cooked beef and roasted garlic. It was the honest, humble food of a hard-working American family. The dark shadows of the ruthless criminal underworld simply melted away. He closed his tired eyes. He finally breathed easily. How did the Viper finally conquer his darkest demons? He learned a profound, life-changing truth. The ultimate cure for a violent, dying empire was never endless wealth or blood-soaked power. It was the unconditional warmth radiating from the gentle hands of a curvy girl who had never known evil.